We're on to Chapter 7 of our U.S. government, and the goals for learning are to explain the purpose of independent agencies and their purpose within the executive branch, to identify and describe the activities of several regulatory commissions, so what do they do, and explain the difference between regulatory commissions and executive agencies. Where are they similar and how do they overlap? And then to just identify and describe the activities of several executive agencies, so you have a general idea of what they do. So the federal bureaucracy, the B word. Many people relate bureaucracy with busy work and delay in things getting done. However, bureaucracy can also be very helpful in that it's ordered and there's hierarchies, so we know who to talk to when certain things need to get done. Congress creates independent agencies to deal with certain matters that no other department of government handles. They are a part of the executive branch, and as I was saying before, the executive branch, they are the doer branch. They get things done. And so the president oversees the executive branch and is in charge of appointing the heads of the independent agencies. In 1958, Congress set up NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and NASA carries out the country's space program. So this is an example of what we're talking about. It conducts space research and maintains the nation's space equipment and satellites and sends satellites to explore outer space and gathers information. So this is one example. We're going to go on and get further into more detail about this. Okay, now we're on to the federal bureaucracy of the executive branch. Here you see that there's this pyramid, and basically the pyramid is an organization of levels. And so the federal bureaucracy is made up of what we talk about the president overseeing the executive branch. So the president is at the very top of the pyramid. And so then we go through the order of power and responsibility. So following the president, there's the executive office of the president. And we talked about the executive office in an earlier chapter, and that includes the White House office, so staff and advisors, the Office of Management and Budget, and they're responsible for making recommendations regarding the budget. Council on Environmental Quality is another one. So in another huge one is the National Security Council. So the president oversees that group. So on top, president, following executive office of the president. Okay, now the executive office of the president oversees the executive department. So those were the departments I talked about, the cabinet. Okay, so the cabinet we reviewed has the Department of State, for instance, the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor. All of these departments, the secretaries are appointed by the president, and if you recall, Congress must approve. Following the executive departments are some agencies, and that's what our chapter is going to be all about. So now we know in the figure in the pyramid where the independent agencies fall. They fall under the executive departments. The highest point position in the country is the president, and so that's why we have the president at the very top. And then again at the bottom is the independent agencies. So that includes the Federal Reserve System that oversees the banks. The U.S. Postal Service, one that we're very familiar with, is actually an independent agency. And did you know Benjamin Franklin was the first one that headed the Postal Service? So let me tell you a little something about the civil service system. In American history, government jobs were given to people from the president's party. So pretty much the president would say, hey, Bob, you know, we really need someone working in the Federal Reserve System. Yeah, you ready for it? And then Bob would have no skills or understanding of what that job entailed. So as we evolved, things changed because Congress passed the Civil Service Act in 1883. Now, why would you even care about this? Is it something you're just going to forget? No, you should not, because you're in the California Conservation Corps, and any job or any position that you might be interested in that maybe requires a little bit more skill in maybe higher pay, you would be taking a civil service exam. So your C1s have taken a civil service exam. Anyone else in the Cs who is not a Corps member has had to pass an exam, and their name goes on a list. So it demonstrates that you have certain skills. According to the law, an agency can only hire from this list. So the California Conservation Corps is responsible for only hiring people who've passed this exam. It matters to you because you might one day need to take this exam. The workers are classified employees because they are hired on the basis of ability. Then there are unclassified employees, and they are usually appointed to their jobs. For example, the president's cabinet are unclassified. But remember, these people are appointed based on their work experience and Congress approval. So there you go. We've covered the executive branch pyramid. So these independent agencies that I've been talking about at the bottom of the pyramid, though equally as important and valid as any other spot on the pyramid, they have many names. So if you hear about agencies or other terms such as commissions, boards, or administrations, they are part of administrating the federal government. And what do I mean by administrate? It's kind of an abstract word, but basically it means to manage or direct. So when you hear about administrators, they are people managing or directing staff, goals. They are in charge of statistics usually and tracking the performance of an agency, and they have to prove its validity if it's being functional. So I've been talking a lot about the executive branch. In the pyramid we saw in the prior slide had to do with the executive branch. But how does the legislative and judicial branch, what role do they have? Do they have any role at all? Well, even though these agencies are independent, the other branches of government do have a say in how the agencies are run. So in the legislative branch, that's the lawmaking body. We're talking about the Senate. They must approve the president's appointments. So Congress does have a say, and again, I want to reaffirm the whole idea of checks and balances. We're keeping no one branch in greater power than another. So Congress keeps the executive branch in check in case they make faulty decisions. And it's really important because people err. To err is human. So also the agencies must file reports with Congress once or twice a year. And usually these reports have to do with the effectiveness of the agency, what they've achieved, what their goals were. Sometimes the judicial branch reviews decisions the other branches make about the independent agencies. So that's important too, because what does the judicial branch do but review and make sure we're following our Constitution, which is our guiding principles and determines the structure of our government. Congress may decide that an agency is costing too much, and they're given the axe. So Congress can close unnecessary agencies. They can also determine that we're not going to allocate this money to you. And when I say allocate, I mean we're not going to give you this much money. We're going to give you a little less. You're not performing the way we want. We're going to allocate somewhere else. So Congress does decide that an agency is no longer needed and closes the agency. So if the agency isn't functioning or necessary anymore, it's over, as they say. Okay, so we're going to do a quick review because we are trucking through this chapter. So on a piece on a sheet of paper, write the answers to the following questions and use complete sentences, please. Number 1, what are the 3 major parts of the federal bureaucracy? Okay, that's a really good question, and I think you'll do well answering it. What makes up the base of the pyramid? Who represents each executive department? What office directly assists the president? Who is responsible for the executive branch? And what do you think? Why are many different governmental departments and organizations needed? Why all this? Why? Number 7, is the federal bureaucracy too large? Explain. So there are different kinds of agencies and commissions. First of all, we'll discuss the independent regulatory commissions. There's about 12 of them. And what is a regulatory commission? Well, they're an agency that enforces rules and regulations. And remember, agency, that word originates meaning to do, to achieve, to get something done. They enforce their rules and regulations, and then a board of commission, there's about 5 to 7 members on the board, so it's a group of people that leads each agency. So it's not one leader that oversees it. However, the president does appoint these members, and then guess what? Senate approves them. We're going to go into greater detail on some examples of these regulatory commissions, so you can really have a good idea of what that means. Okay, again, at the bottom of that organizational pyramid that we saw earlier are the commissions and agencies. So the regulatory commissions have many duties. One is the Federal Trade Commission. It's also known as the FTC as an acronym, and it was developed in 1914 to prevent unfair trade practices that could harm the free enterprise system in the United States. Now, what is free enterprise? This word has a lot of emotion to it because it means the freedom of private business, meaning people-owned business, not government-owned. People-owned business, people like you and me, to operate with few government rules and laws. Now, if we were a person who owned a business, that would be great. Yay for us. There are arguments, however, that people violate certain ethics when they don't have enough government rules or laws. So I want you to know that free enterprise is a wonderful word. Ideally, it's great, but also sometimes internationally, the U.S. has been known to violate other people's rights and protections. And we'll get into that later. The FTC enforces laws to protect the public from price fixing. So the FTC does protect the public, and that's a very important thing, from false labeling. It protects the public from advertising that makes untrue claims. So if you sell toothpaste and you say it gets rid of plaque, you have to prove that. You can't just state that. If you have a product that says organic, it must be certified organic. So if there is a false claim, the FTC has a Bureau of Consumer Protection. You can submit a complaint against a company. So that's important for you to know. If you ever come across a company that has done harm, report them right away. It's your responsibility, actually. So you can go online to the FTC Consumer Protection and file a claim. Easy as that. When we talk about free enterprise also, what does enterprise really mean? According to dictionary.com, it means a company organized for commercial purposes, a business firm. That's one definition of it. Also, it can mean participation or engagement in projects. So that's an enterprise. As an example, you could say our country was formed by the enterprise of resolute men and women, so of people who are focused and ready. It can also mean a project undertaken or to be undertaken, especially one that is important or difficult, that requires boldness or energy. So you notice in the word enterprise, there's a certain kind of spunk that's necessary, a courage and a kind of willingness to submit to adversity, to confront challenges. And that's what the Federal Trade Commission should embody, to also protect people, consumers, from companies that might go too far with their boldness, I guess you could say. And let me give you an example. They make sure that fabric that burns easily is not used in children's clothing. They also make sure that labels on products are truthful. Again, like back to the dentist, if you're brushing your teeth with a certain kind of toothpaste, they sure as heck better be advertising what it can do honestly. Now let's go on to some other regulatory commissions. We're going on into more examples of regulatory commissions. The Interstate Commerce Commission was created in 1887, and at the time, railroads were our main source of transportation, shipping products such as food. Then the ICC regulated buses, trucks, and boats as our forms of travel improved. However, this is a fine example of when a commission is shut down. Congress found the ICC no longer necessary and worth spending on. So in 1996, it was shut down. In 1974, we developed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so its goal is to ensure nuclear power plants operate safely. And the main cost of nuclear power is the development of the plant itself to ensure safety. Now, unfortunately, nuclear power takes 100,000 half-lives to deteriorate. So even in 1,000,000 years, the nuclear vulnerabilities still have not completely decayed. So basically, even after 1,000,000 years, nuclear waste is still prevalent. So the main cost of nuclear power is taking care of the waste, although there's hardly any waste. But the waste is extremely devastating, as we've learned from Japan after the earthquake, and when the power plants released radiation, which can mutate genes and destroy life as we know it. So though nuclear power can be extremely effective, as an example, the US uses about 20% of their power as nuclear, and they're developing other ways. Fusion, there's fission. So basically you're banging atoms together, or the nucleus together in atoms at high rates, and it releases energy. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission gives permission for radioactive material to be stored or transported for civilian use, so for our use, okay? So it makes sure that there's safe ways to work with nuclear material, and it can shut down any plant that is in danger to public health. So they're in charge of overseeing our safety. Okay, so we're going to cover the last of examples of regulatory commissions. So the Federal Communications Commission, otherwise known as the FCC, is big regulatory commission. It was established in 1934, and it controls who can have licenses to broadcast information over the airways and what frequencies people may use. And so the frequency is the location on the airwaves that a radio or television station uses. So when you are using the radio, for instance, you're dialing into their frequency. So the power to regulate that is massive. Also, the FCC ensures good communication is available to the public. It requires radio and television stations to make some public service broadcasts. It regulates communication satellites, and it ensures nation's communication system can take care of emergencies in case of natural disasters like floods and earthquakes. And an example of this is letting people know when there's an emergency or a terrorist attack, for instance. They established the emergency alert system in 1994, and it replaced all the other emergency systems. So it honed in and made this more universal and accessible emergency system where radio and TV stations use what they call the EAS, and it broadcasts emergency information. Not only does it quickly inform billboards, cable stations, TV and radio, if there's an emergency, people can respond quickly. For an example, they have something called the Amber Plan, which was created in 1997 after a young girl, a 9-year-old, Amber, was kidnapped. She was murdered. And so in response to that, the FCC created an Amber Plan, and it's to alert the public if there's an abduction. So all that information is quickly through one coherent system emitted, so the public knows right away. So the FCC does have a lot of responsibility. With the internet now in place, issues of open internet have come up, and it's called net neutrality. It's a way of referring to open internet principles. Now, this is when our amendments come into place, and this is also when the judicial branch plays a role in ensuring that the FCC is making certain that the right of free speech is being met. So anytime the FCC does something, the judicial branch will ensure that we're following the First Amendment. So transparency, no blocking, no unreasonable discrimination. Basically, there's open internet rules. And yeah, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of violent language that can be used on the internet. There's a lot of websites that are risky. They're very rated X, or they publish things that are how to make bombs. But that is something that is no blocking. It's following the no blocking principles. If it's lawful content, it cannot be blocked. So there's certain issues that are coming up with net neutrality, and the goal is to keep the internet open as possible. And what that means is we have to make sure that anything posted on the internet is legal, and no blocking. In other countries, the internet has blocks on certain sites, and so we are lucky to have open internet. We're going to close out this chapter covering independent executive agencies. Other independent agencies within the executive branch are organized like executive departments. An independent agency, if you really think about the word, it means that they are not influenced or controlled by others' authority or jurisdiction. And when it comes to and these independent agencies tend to be extensions of the executive branch. However, the president is pretty much not in control as much, because his or her power is limited in dismissing the head of the agency or a member. Independent agencies were established through separate statutes by Congress. So Congress sets the goals of the agency. So there's goals that they are driving towards, usually very specific. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. Again, I know I keep driving this home, but agency, its Latin root is to do. So these are, again, the doers. They have only a few employees, or they could have many. They operate much like a business, and they provide services to the public. And they don't typically, I'd say overall, 99% of the time, they do not enforce rules like the regulatory commissions that we just went over. So now we're going to cover a few of the independent executive agencies. I think we reviewed a little bit the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's another agency that was created in 1958. And the goal is to develop peaceful uses of outer space. And they created something called a space lab and also a space shuttle that could explore space and repair satellites and experiment for industry and medicine. They also built a permanent space station, and they worked in partnership with Canada, Japan, and Russia. So NASA helps us understand better our place in the universe, and also, is there life on other planets? There's a lot left to learn about our amazing universe. And NASA, not only does it repair satellites that help, with communications, instant communication, but those satellites also can inform us of what's happening in other countries. So NASA kind of overlaps with other agencies, or actually even cabinets, such like National Defense. The National Security Council is another one that sometimes works systematically with NASA. The Environmental Protection Agency was created in 1970, and they have a huge role, and I think I'm projecting that the Environmental Protection Agency will expand even more than it already has. There's a need to protect our environment. They enforce laws that Congress passes to keep air and water clean and to prevent pollution. And these laws are becoming more and more strict, and they regulate what certain industries, how they dispose of their toxic waste, things such as that. Many people have heard of the Social Security Administration. There's a common term that we hear, Social Security check. The Social Security Administration was developed in 1995. Before that, it was part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And it's extremely important because it's our safety net in case we need help. For instance, if you become disabled, you will be paid because you cannot work. So you don't end up homeless and hungry on the street. So the Social Security Administration has a very important job of maintaining the overall health and support of people's welfare. It spends more money than any other independent agency. And that's because many people retire, and so all those taxes that you pay every year, a lot of it may go, if you look under it, it'll say a lot of it goes to your retirement. It also provides health care once you're over 65, and medical services are called Medicare. On to another agency that's quite different. It's the National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities, and it encourages the development of arts and literature. It's kind of the meat and heart of the agency. It has two main groups that you might have heard of. There's the National Endowment for the Arts, and then there's the National Endowment for the Humanities. And what they do is they make grants available to individuals, theaters, museums, and music groups. And what that means is you can apply for a grant that they have if you meet these certain criteria, and it's money. It's money to support your goal. And if that goal meets the set goals of the National Foundation on the Arts, you can win a grant, especially if you're motivated by continuing on the artistry in literature. A lot of history is learned through literature. A lot of our passion and creativity and inspiration are driven by the arts. We can understand people's stories through art. So it is controversial. Some people think that it should not be a public service, that we should not be funneling money into a public service that is devoted to the arts and humanities. Whereas others argue that it certainly should. And your thoughts on that would be interesting to hear. So the word endowment is a key word. It's a gift given to a person or organization to provide income. So National Endowment of the Arts means a gift given to the arts. National Endowment for the Humanities, a gift given to the humanities. Now, should that be a public service, or do you think it should be private, meaning certain people we just hope, find value in the arts and humanities and will give money privately? This is our final slide before the review, so we'll close out with the United States Postal Service as another agency. And originally, it was part of the President's cabinet. Benjamin Franklin was the first to lead it, and the leader of the United States Postal Service is called the Postmaster. The United States Postal Service not only operates to protect the nation's mail and deliver it, it also enforces laws concerning the mail. For instance, did you know it's illegal to send guns and liquor through the mail? And it's also against mailing lottery tickets, since they are considered a form of gambling. Postal workers are unionized, much like a lot of people in certain blue-collar jobs. I guess that's it for Postal Service. We'll move on to the Peace Corps, another one that was developed in 1961. Congress, of course, establishes these agencies. I just wanted to remind you of that because you might see that in our review questions. The goal of the Peace Corps originally was to bring about peace and friendship to other countries. So we'd send teachers, farmers, engineers to these other countries. For instance, engineers would go to Africa and teach the Africans how to build water dams, or farmers would develop good organic farming techniques, and teachers would teach English. In fact, my mom went to Thailand and taught English to children, Thai children, in the 60s. There's another program called the Peace Corps Worldwide School Program. And what that is it sends students to learn what it's like to be a teenager in another country. So pretty much the Peace Corps is a bridge to develop relationships with other countries and to demythologize other countries, because when you don't know about another culture, there tends to be ridiculous myths around that culture or around their religion, and we stigmatize people. So the Peace Corps is an excellent way to demythologize, but also develop a sharing of ideas and to contribute to worldwide growth and development. So read through these questions and to the best of your ability answer them. Feel free to refer to the previous slides. And it's a lengthier review because next you're going to have a midterm which reviews all the slides that we have come to so far.